Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Labours of Sports Coaching with myself, Mark Carroll. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Kurt Lindley. Kurt is the founder of the Be More Learning and Development Group and has been for 10 years in terms of doing work in this space around the science of learning and the act of it, and probably the art of it as well. Kurt, we might get into that. So, but maybe let's take it all the way back to the start so that people can kind of get to know you a little bit better. What was the sort of the background or the genesis of your sort of mission to help other people learn about learning?
So I suppose there's two stories there. One is about the science of learning, which is probably easier to tackle, and why. What's the mission or what's the journey behind it? It probably started in my mid-20s. Now I'm like mid-40s now, so it probably started mid to late 20s, where I think I was working for British Cycling as a coach educator, and I was invited to go on a 2-day tutor training course. And in those 2 days, we were like packed full of information around what learning was. And, to give the people the dues, they did a really good job in terms of teaching us, I think, more about facilitation than actually learning and the science of learning. But then when we came to the pieces around learning, we were looking at things like Honey and Munford and Cole's learning cycle and a variety of other models that for me at that time, I really just couldn't get my head around. I was like, which model is it? I have no idea which is the trusted model and why do we do things in this way. And so I really struggled to really make sense of it, even though I passed the 2-day training course and I became a coach educator for cycling and for athletics and for one or two other sports. And over the next 10 years, still had this in the back of my mind. I don't really know what this learning thing is. I can facilitate, I can stand in front of a room, I can put out flip chart papers and ask people to do group activities. I can get post-it notes out and highlighters, and we can look like we're having a great time. And it might be more like entertainment than education. But I
Mm,
hadn't got to grips with what the science of learning was. And then somebody turned up at work one day with this little, well, not little, it was like an A3 map of something like 30 different theories on the science of learning. And it made me realize that actually I'd just been so narrowly kind of like focused on these two or three that had been shared on this course. And it was more about not which is the trusted model, but which is the model that works for me,
mm,
which is the one
mm,
that resonates most with me. And then it probably took another 5 years to get to a point of creating what we created, which is between myself and a colleague, Laura, we came up with this model that we refer to as ASRI. So it's 4 letters, but it stands for attention, sense making, retention, and internalization. And basically, we sat down around a dinner table one afternoon, sorry, just chatting about what we believed good learning to look like and what science we felt we could trust, and started to pile them up physically in piles on this table, and then said to ourselves, I think we've got something here. Like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to create some new science. What we have to do is understand which of the science of learning we trust and then attach
mm,
it to a kind of a thing. So that's what it came to, these 4 stages of an
mm,
experience. We have to get people to attend to learning. We have to help people make sense of learning. Once they've done that, we have to support them in the retention of that learning. And then finally, in terms of the internalization, it's more about, right, well, what are you doing to embed this within your everyday activities? So where's the deliberate practice? Where's the advocacy for you to go and do something, your own agency?
mm.
So I was driven by confusion and also driven probably by frustration with the courses I was going on as a learner, still going, yeah, I think could be better. I think
Mm,
I'm going to forget this because it's not as good as I would like it to be. So
mm.
long answer, and there's probably a lot more to it, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of where I came from, confusion and frustration, to a sense of clarity around how I go about designing learning. And that's what it was intended, how we would go about designing learning. It wasn't really intended to be of help to other people. It just became that later.
Yeah, but there's something in that. Just, I mean, first I want to go back to one of the first things you said because it is interesting because you're kind of put onto courses, aren't you? Where it's not that learning isn't mentioned and isn't that sort of pedagogy, those sorts of things aren't considered, but learning's often seen as an outcome. But I think actually what your work almost seems to position it as a process because I suppose there's a difference in this as far as how you can upskill and your learning as a process versus having steps that you do and then assuming that learning just comes out at the other end as an outcome. But then when you then track your kind of journey as to how you started to kind of figure out what works for you, is this almost again positioning learning theory, and because there's an abundance of it, it's so true. Like, it is just, there are so many different models, so many different things. But I wonder if there's value to having a sort of relativistic view on the modelling and the strategy that you use that work for you, that make sense for you, that you can trust, because different sports sometimes align themselves to different ways of learning. And if we're talking about coach education here, I wonder if how far that process is. I mean, is there any truth to that? I suppose, in terms of linking it back to your experience, it just seems like that having that relative view on things has helped you guys appreciate what works for you and then what can work for other people in certain spaces. I don't know if that fits with your narrative a little bit.
Yeah. So we designed the model because of our own poor experiences, almost, or what we needed as individuals, as learners. So we didn't go, oh, we've got this model, we're going to write a book and we're going to write some articles and sell something, which does end up being a path for some people. It was almost like an output of our own kind of challenges within our own experiences as both learners and designers of learning. And we also didn't want to say that other models weren't accurate or appropriate or right. We just wanted to go, what science do we trust? And then how do we make that science accessible? Because we want it to be valid. So as far as we can, link it right back to source material. But we know that some of that source material is quite hard to ingest, appreciate. Yeah. So if we can distill it and translate it into something that becomes accessible at different tiers. So for example, if nothing else, you remember that when you're creating an experience, there has to be some attention associated with it, like how to get people to attend to it. There needs to be some sense making, there needs to be some retention activity, and there needs to be an internalization stuff. At the very least, that you can stop at that point, but then you can go down to, okay, so what are the challenges or problems this model's trying to solve? Lack of relevance, distraction, poorly organized information, lack of confidence to practice. Right, well, we can go next here. What's the science and the psychology and the motivational theory or the schema theory or the perception theory or whichever one of the theories that we attach to those words do we want to look at? So we can keep going down in tiers to get to the source material based on your desire for access to it. But in terms of, again, come back to coach education, we can make this as accessible as possible through 4 words and 8 questions that will help people create better experiences.
So, I mean, because I want to work, I'm desperate to work through that framework with yourself, because that's what I so enjoyed last time I was able to hear you speak, and I want to learn more and more about that. So maybe you can help us, because there was some things, and I wonder if, and you'll keep me right here, but I wonder if it might be nice to sort of frame what is adult education then, because, we're talking about coach education primarily, therefore we're working with adults. Do adults learn differently from kids? Is there a different dynamic there? So I'm just wondering, like, when you came up with this framework, and we'll start to work through that, about how you might attend to things, make sense of things. How is that developed with an appreciation for who's in front of you and maybe the differences of that adult learner? I just wonder, from your experience, what have the unique traits been for adult education?
So I'm not going to profess to be the most versed in this field, but we obviously have this various phrasings of pedagogy and andragogy and ertagogy and a number of other kind of phrases. And if you look at some older research around kind of like adult learning, I think it's Knowles has like 6 items that relate to adult learning, and I wouldn't dismiss any of them. They're about, the information needs to be immediately available, like more just-in-time learning rather than just in case. So if you're teaching me something that I might not need, I'm likely to pay less attention to it, which brings us back to our motivation theory and attention within our model. Within his items are things like needs to relate to past experience. There needs to be something that it builds upon, or it needs to have some sort of scaffolding element to it. So we talk about schema theory. What models do you already have? What maps of the world do you already have? How do we draw that to the fore of your mind to help with landing new information? And that relates to our schema theory part of sense making. So every time that anybody pulls out a particular model to us and says, oh, what about this? What about that? We, in theory, should be able to align our approach to learning to each of those. I just think when you think about adult learning, often when you're working with younger people, you're driving the experience, and probably wrongly. Maybe it needs to be exploratory and more discovery led by the young people. Whereas with adults, it has to be more of a collaboration. So you still have to direct it, because otherwise you could head off all sorts of different places. And if you have some desired outcomes to achieve, there has to be some, legitimate path to follow. But I think the experience for adults needs to be far more connected to who they are and what they want. So when we talk about motivation theory in terms of attention, it's, why is that person there? And what value can they get from that experience? And if we can't, what's our responsibility as educators to show them the value? But what's our responsibility as educators to get them to realize they might need to look harder sometimes for the value? So it might not be immediately available. So you might have come across Anna Stodder's work and the stuff that she's done in coach education. And she often talks about, coaches potentially discarding learning because it doesn't match with models that they already have. Or I hope I'm not getting this wrong, Anna, but the idea that people enter into an experience, they receive some learning, and if they don't see it immediately available, useful, or it doesn't match with the way that they operate, they'll discard it. So what we like to talk about is, well, what's the learner's responsibility here? So if they don't see the immediate value of it, when might they see it being of value? Like, let's say we're talking about working with children with various neurodivergent kind of conditions. Oh, well, I don't work with kids with or coaches or athletes with neurodivergent conditions, so it's not a value. What happens if one turns up to your session? Oh, suddenly it's a value, right? Okay, so we need to look sometimes for where it might be a future value to us, and therefore we're more motivated to learn.
Because is that not, because I always, it's so true that in a sense, at the very beginning of any coach education course, you're trying to get buy-in, but the people in front of you, they come with either, I always try and put them into maybe, you might say 4 camps. So you've got the really competent coaches who also want to learn. You've got the competent coaches who are there because it's a tick box, and governing bodies now mandate that they have to do certain courses, so they're there sometimes, and if it's not they don't want to learn, they might maybe feel they don't need to learn, or they can't learn anything further from this particular course. They go in with all these preconceptions. Then you get the non-competent coach, or maybe the beginner coach, the novice coach, however way you want to bracket it, who does want to learn. Then you get the novice coach, and maybe again doesn't want to learn. You've got all these people that are there, and I suppose that's always the challenge. How do you actually capture people in those spaces? And I suppose having that conversation is to, well, it might not be relevant now, but it could be, and those sorts of things. I could so see the value of that, but it's trying to capture those different people who are bringing different motivation starting points to the session, isn't it?
I think, yeah, and I think this is where, like, there's a science of learning. You talked about the art, and I think the art relates to relationships. So what we've noticed, we've worked with the World Anti-Doping Association over the last 5 years. A lot of our work has been virtual, but some of it has been working in Kenya with the Anti-Doping Association there, but equally in Poland, where their national kind of like trainer team. And across all of that work, particularly the online stuff, what we noticed is the first 5 minutes are the most important time. So if you spend the first 5 minutes of your course telling them who you are, what the learning outcomes are, and what they can expect from the day, you've probably already lost them, because they've booked the course, they know what the course is about, they expect to get certain input because they've read that and they've paid for it, or somebody's told them to be there. And in theory, they probably know who you are because somebody's let them know early on. So that your life story isn't actually that important at that point in time, unless any of those items are specifically credible to that person. So for example, if you've got somebody standing in the front of a room who's delivering, and the audience perceive that person to have high credibility because they say, I've got a master's in psychology, then it's worth saying that thing because it connects you to them in a credibility sense. But if you've got a master's in psychology and they're not bothered about it, you're just telling them information they don't need to hear. So come back to that, you've got those 4 people you talked about: competent want to be there, competent don't want to be there, incompetent or novice want to be there, and novice don't want to be there. If you start in the first 5 minutes with a really good provocation, something that either makes them think or makes them want to respond to you, like that it's a statement that is incongruent with their views or values, beliefs, suddenly they're switched on and they're like, whoa, I don't agree with that. I want to share my thinking. Suddenly their motivations are now to respond to you and to engage, rather than, I'm here, I've seen the 5 learning outcomes, I know I'm going to be here for 2 days, I know it's a process. I know that we'll break at 10 o'clock. There'll be lunch at 12. Yeah, like they'll perceive the experience as something they're having to just do. Whereas again, get that first 5 minutes right with the right intrigue or novelty, or it has to be purposeful novelty. You'll have them, I was going to say in the palm of your hands, but maybe not so, but you'll have them at least coming forward towards you rather than leaning back away from you.
It's funny you say that now, because we all, like, you are making me think, why do we do that? Because it's probably more for the presenter in that space. Because I think you had the nail on the head when you said about credibility, because you're coming onto a course, right, and you have people there and you want them to respect you and to, want to listen to you. So you're going to try your best to impress, and you're going to say all these things about your titles and your status. But then, like you said, if they don't care about that, then you've wasted time. If they do care about that, there's almost then the hypocrisy that if we want to create a place where people feel empowered and confident to share, we don't want to establish power dynamics. Now, the status alone oft brings with it a power dynamic that actually could inhibit the very potential for people to want to come forward, because then all of a sudden, oh, this person is impressive. I now feel either that it's a threat to me and maybe now I'm not open, or actually it's a challenge to me and now it's about me trying to show off what I know, as opposed to, and that is always the issue. Sometimes I always find people that answer questions in coach education courses that I think isn't about them asking a question or trying to, it's actually about them showing how much they apparently know. And that it's funny that all these things can occur from that first 5 minutes potentially, because you're setting that tone, aren't you? It's true.
Yeah, I think the more I've done it, the older I've got. I mean, I wouldn't have done these things in this way probably 20 years ago, but now I think it's really just sometimes important to label it. So like, you might even tell them why you're doing it this way once you've done it. Because like, again, adult learning theory, Knowles would probably say something like, adults struggle to engage with something unless they know the purpose of it. So if you don't show them the outcomes, they're like, well, why am I doing this? Why am I learning this? What relevance has it got to? So that's why we show people outcomes. This is why, here's the outcomes, and this is why we're doing this. It's going to lead to these outcomes. Actually, sometimes it's better to get them to go through the kind of that inertia of, why are we doing this? Well, let's be curious. Why are we doing this? Like it's effortful, and it's like, can't see the relevance maybe immediately, but it's made me think. It's a provocation. It's got me at the very least wanting to speak. Now, You touched on something there about hierarchy and sort of loud voices. Yeah, I think all of these things are like almost it's like playing the game of learning. So I don't need to tell anybody that I have a master's in psychology unless I think it's going to help me help them. So it might be to help them to listen to me because they see that as a point of credibility. But I might just need to tell a small number of people who need to hear it rather than the whole room. But I could equally tell people that I've been in life-threatening situations. I could tell people that I've run ultra marathons. Like, each of these things will connect me to one or two audience members. So it's like, when do I say these things? For what purpose? And if it's about building relationship, that's fine. But if it's about just me telling you a bunch of stuff about me, then that's me as an educator letting my ego out, which could be, yes, like intimidatory at some point for other people.
I mean, you say that word provocation, then could that be, so if I was to contextualize it to football, and actually there's a question inside this one, could that be saying something that is going to spark debate deliberately? You don't even need to fully believe the opinion yourself, but in football, if I said that drill-based coaching is still really important, a lot of coaches now are raised in a game-based space that straight away pipe up and go, well, this or that, or maybe they do agree or disagree. Does it even need to necessarily be connected to coaching? Could a provocation be, what do you call it, like a brain warm-up? It could be something like, you don't want to go as deep as like something really philosophical, but it could be some, pitch. Does free will exist? I've seen people do stuff like that in the past, and it's like, well, it would depend on your audience, obviously, I think.
Yeah.
I think coaches are that, but what's useful? What's more useful to you? Is it highly contextualized, that provocation, or is it something that just is an icebreaker of some other sort? What would you say?
I think in general, it all has to be relevant. So often when we start virtual sessions, we do things that aren't so relevant because they're applicable to all. But let's say we will just start with a really simple. If it's a virtual session, people will put one answer responses in the chat function, but we'd say something like cat or dog, which your preference. Now, what we find is at times people write the actual name of the dog, which gives us an opportunity to have a conversation with that person. Say, oh, notice that you said X. So we now start building a relationship. So cat and dog does not relate to football or coaching or sport or whatever, but it's an answer. It's a question everybody can answer, because you'll also get people saying both. You go, oh, right, okay, this tells me a little bit about you. Now, you can only do those so many times before people feel, what's the point? But hopefully, if you're building relationships through those, they're not just icebreakers or warm-ups. They're actually, no, it's allowing me to have a conversation with Jake about his dog, and he seems to be really interested in pugs. And somebody else on the call is a pug trainer in their part-time. Right, we've built a relationship between people, which is what we want. We want a relational experience, not just delivery of learning, but so then we might go, mountain or coast for a holiday, and then people will say things, and we'll find that people have been to the same holiday destination. Right. But at some point, bringing that into, like if you're doing the gaming industry, you might say Xbox versus PlayStation, right? We can have a conversation about that. People might even give a year, which was the best year of the best kind of release of Xbox versus PlayStation. You could say Sonic versus Mario Brothers, like the iconics, and see what people come up with. So again, in terms of football, it could be one team versus another, or one system versus another in terms of players on the pitch, in terms of their organization of themselves. It could be anything like that.
And would the coach at any point, or the coach educate at any point in your advice, would they answer any of those provocation questions, or should it be about letting them sit and see in that space? I would wonder.
It should be something where there isn't a bias. Like there shouldn't be, unless you're going to use it jokingly, because you can provide a bias, and if you speak and give an answer, and it's one particular answer, Celtic versus Rangers, you might find that you like divide the audience, right?
Yeah, be careful there.
Yeah. So like you have to be. When we were in Kenya, it was like, I think it was Manchester United versus Arsenal. Like if you talked about Manchester United in the room and there happened to be Arsenal fans there, they'd stop wanting to talk to you as a consequence.
So
it was
true.
that.
Yep.
And it was like, right,
Yep.
okay, so some of these aren't helpful, but it's not right or wrong. It's understanding the impact of your action. So I've tried this and I wanted to do this with it, and this is my, I didn't get it wrong. There was just an impact that I either didn't understand that was going to happen or didn't predict. Right, I need to think of that in the future.
Okay. So where do we go then from there? So there's been the provocation to start conversation, and then how we kind of lead on to the idea of making sense. How does that, as part of the next stage of your framework, where does that come in? What does that mean? If we can expand on that.
So this, again, there's two things here. One is the relationship that has to exist between learners, which is parallel to the model. So when we talk about attention, it might be our provocations, and we're triggering motivation there. That's about motivation theory, but also we're doing something in a way that is low cognitive effort. So we don't get what we call cognitive overload. So the questions aren't so challenging that I can't answer them or I'm confused by them. They're double-barreled. So that's the attention piece. When it goes to sense making, now the attention piece is often, we can do it in this scenario that we've just described as a individual exercise. What do you as an individual think? Think for 90 seconds. What is your personal answer? Don't share it yet, but what is it? You've been provoked to think and respond individually. If we move towards sense making, this is where we're talking about perception theory and schema theory. What do you perceive and how do you express that? And what do you know of the past that's informed that? So your schema that has existed in the past. Now, that's the theory piece that we're trying to kind of build upon. But in terms of relationship, we use a very simple teaching exercise, which is either think, pair, share. Or we'll stick with that one rather than give you two. So think, pair, share. Attention, we think. When we come to sense making, that's where we pair up. So I now pair up with you in an experience, and we go, I've got an answer on my piece of paper, you've got one on yours. Let's share our answers, but then let's ask each other what drew us to that answer, or share what stood out from somebody else's answer. So now my desire is simply not to get a right and a wrong, not to get an agreement or a disagreement. It's a, what did you write and why? What did you write and why? And explore that. So now we get two people that were strangers before sharing in a way.
And is there a reason, Kurt, then, that you give time to digest and think through things individually before then you then force them to, not force them, but well, sometimes
Yeah.
it feels that way. It depends on how the learner's perceiving your learning. But is that a deliberate step there that you're offering space to reflect individually before then we engage with these tasks?
Yeah. We've been guilty in the past, I think, of going, here's a question, going to groups and talk about it. Now, some people will already have an answer. Some people will still be working out what the question means. Some people will be worried about how to respond to that question in front of peers. And some people just need thinking time. So to sort of like deal with all that, we just go take 90 seconds, come up with the answer. If you've already got an answer, double check it, rethink it. What's your second opinion on this? Have a different perspective. What that also helps with is it means that everybody is armed with information when they go into a breakout room, if it's virtual, or to a group activity at a table. So we all have something to share rather than generally a blank kind of on some people.
Yeah, yeah. And that's so true. And it's probably always influenced by time. I always think it's better to have a course, I think, that's got less content that's delivered really meaningfully. Then I think, and I've experienced, and I know what this is like, when you've got a lot of content, you have to ask questions there and then. Give me an answer, put the chat box now, quickly, 30 seconds. It does not allow time for that confidence building to actually think something through, to feel confident of then speaking. And that's going to, again, set tones, continue to, make people not want to talk, or if you have given them that space, probably help with that. I can imagine that's really powerful.
I think this brings me to the other strategy, which is we call 1, 2, 4 all. And again, it's a strategy that's used a lot in education. But if you have a loud voice, particularly in your room, and you expect to have that, what you might find is their confidence might influence either other people's desire to speak, or their confidence might wrongfully be seen as they're correct. Like, I'm confident in my answer, so I'll say it now, and everyone, oh yeah, he seems really confident, must be correct. And what we want to do is create a space for more voices to be heard. Now, I'm not saying let's let the introvert talk in front of everybody when they really don't want to, but it's giving more people more opportunity to speak. So if we use the strategy of 1, 2, 4 all, it's individually, you think of your own response. That's the 1. 2 is where you share with each other your thinking on that response. So why did we come up with that? What intrigues me about it? Then you put people into a group of 4. Now, what you find is the 2 people have built a small level of a relationship where they're almost on each other's side. They've heard each other and they've bonded a little bit. So when they join a 4, it's 2 pairings where they can look after each other a little bit in that 4 conversation. I'm not like 1 going into a 3, or because even if nobody knows each other, there's always them versus me sort of thing. So if there's 2 people paired with another 2 people, so you create a group of 4, you've got a really like small micro community now who are more happy to listen to each other's perspective and tell each other their perspective.
Yeah, but I've seen that as well. Like where someone's maybe, if they're not said something fully, someone might come in as well. It's kind of like this and building on it, and it catches them. That's straight true.
Yeah, and then what we want to do is we might even take that 4 into an 8, or we take that 8 into a 16. It all depends on how we want to keep building it. But the idea is through that second part of our model, sense making. That's what people are doing. They're telling stories to each other. They're making sense of the information. They're making sense of this question. They're making sense of it in their context. So what does this mean? What does it mean to me in my world? Which is very, the 2-stage process that we see people going through. But they're doing it in conversation with their peers, that by the end of like the first half an hour, we've already got everybody to give a view, and we've already got a small number of small communities that are happy to share with each other that we can now use for the rest of the course, because they've got that kinship for each other. So it allows us to deliver better learning because we've now built a sense of a desire to support each other, and maybe a desire to help the educator, because it's not all the educator's responsibility. Sometimes the educator is exhausted. Sometimes they have got lost. Sometimes they need a little bit of a moment to kind of rethink. The learners can also help with that because they've now become, again, relational in a good way between everybody in that room. It's not just the educator's role to make learning happen. It's a collective responsibility.
Yeah. And you know what? I think what's crazy about that is that you could see that, is that going to take a long time? But it really wouldn't. This is about efficiencies. This is actually all that time where we had the diagrams up, the learning outcomes, all these other things. That is taking up time. We actually free up that time with removing that aspect, or at least not attaching so much importance to that aspect, which is really is more educator central than it is to learner central. You can really see that, and I would probably, I suppose, I could absolutely agree with that purely in a research context. When I've done focus group type activities, it's always helped better when I've actually given them time to split off and chat about things and then bring that together. That camaraderie is absolutely, I think that is absolutely visible. So it's so true. On that point as well that you mentioned, Kurt, around being quite deliberate and not just encouraging them to share what they think, but encouraging them to talk with their group about why they've come to think the way they think, because I think that there's a lot of gold in that, because the reflexive element of understanding how our biographies influence the way we think. If we go back to how we can make the learning relevant and make the learning inviting to the different people in the room, I think a lot of people would surprise themselves by having that introspection on, actually, the reason why I think this is, well, it's traced back to when I was a player, or it's traced back to how I've learned. And then when someone gives you a contrasting view, but they then allow you to understand where that view came from, that in itself builds up a picture of, well, we're talking about disrupting our schemas, then that's a gateway into understanding maybe the way I think isn't that it's correct. It's because that's how I've been told to think. That's how I've been. That seems really powerful to me. What has your experience been of how the utility of that?
I think, yeah, absolutely. It comes back to a phrase that I've kind of I suppose I've shrunk from a guy who wrote a book, Peter Senge or Senge, I don't know how to pronounce his surname, but it's a fifth discipline, I think it's called, and it's about learning organizations. And these are 5 disciplines by which an organization should run if it wants to be a truly kind of robust learning organization. But within one of these areas, Peter coined this phrase, which was something like, advocate your position, but be open to influence. So the idea being that every time we enter into a room, a conversation, a meeting, we need to advocate our position. This is what I believe and this is why. And we're happy and we're confident with that. However, we have the humility to go, I am open to influence. I'm open to you changing my mind based on the new information you're about to share with me that I wasn't aware of. So I didn't know that your thinking was led by this. I didn't know where your origin or source was for the way that you saw things. And now you've shared that with me. It's made me rethink mine, or it's helped me reestablish that I actually truly believe in mine. But the idea that we can enter into each conversation being confident with what we know, but also humility to change our view on things, which, sometimes we stuck to stuff and we really want it to be the thing, but actually now it's not helpful to stick there. It's slowing you down, and it's better to be open. Change tack.
I think that is always a challenge, and from my experience, because I think people have anchor points. So there's certain types of learning and type of experience that people use as their frame of reference for everything else, and they work out of a sort of philosophy of thought or a core methodology. And in some ways that's really important for them, because an anchor point is important. It's legitimate, and it helps you then move forward. It helps you act. Otherwise, I think coaches, and what does invariably happen in with the beginning of a coach's journey anyway, they're bamboozled with so many things. So actually having some anchor point is really important. But then the challenge is, how do you create an environment where we want to test hypothesis but not guard it? Because there's a difference. Some people go in with the view of, and that's that advocation, isn't it? And I just wonder, is there other conversations that need to happen before that? How do you tee that up in a way that it doesn't become a debate? Because, well, or is it? It's not necessarily a debate, but something where there is a potential to say, you might be right, I might be wrong. That's a hard thing to do, because, as I say, these anchor points that people use for good reason are very embedded into their psyche and how they move. So how do you manage that in terms of how would you actually facilitate that at a deeper level in terms of a wee bit more detail there would be helpful?
So if you built the relationship and the atmosphere in the right way, I don't think that generally becomes an issue. You just tend to find people going, Jesus, yeah, I didn't know I attached myself so heavily to this, and maybe I need to rethink it. And they're more comfortable to admit in front of others that their perspective might need to change. But that assumes that you've started from the first 5 minutes creating, I want to use the phrase, a psychologically safe environment in this context. But I would never use those words in a session. Don't go, this is a safe environment. Don't go, I'm going to create psychological safety. You don't create it by saying it. You create it by creating it. And that's it. That's it. So if you've done that right, then I don't think you get many challenges. I mean, some people just really want to stick to what they know, and you have to say, that's cool. You stick to what you know. Like, we're not going to
Yeah,
fight you on it. It's
yeah,
just not how maybe the majority see it, or it might just be, this is one of those things where there is a right answer and yours is not on that. That's something that you're going to have to kind of like manage yourself, because, you know, we can't pretend all learners are all polite and helpful and supportive.
yeah,
But I also think it's okay to, it depends on what your group is, but it's okay to go, you know, when you get stuff wrong or you realize you were wrong, like you feel an emotional response to it. Like when you feel that, you're going to want to defend your position. Ask yourself, how honest is that defense?
yeah, yeah. Is that a reflection of the emotion, or is it a reflection of the credibility of the opinion? Because that is true as well. Because I think on the flip side, isn't it? You want people to advocate with an openness, but also advocate with a confidence that they might be, and they might be correct as well. And we shouldn't
Yeah.
actually just completely disband from what we know to be true, just out of this sort of air of psychological safety, all these sort of buzzwords as we mentioned, that, you know, critical discourse is about having a position and arguing that, but it's almost like stress testing it, and sometimes we need to push back. And having a group of coaches, I think, where they do push back, I think that it's important to allow it to a point, isn't it? Because I've sometimes seen it where coach educator stimulates the debate, but as soon as someone starts to, you know, respond to a question in a way that feels forceful, sometimes we can try to cool the atmosphere very quickly and try to. But there is a bit of a being brave enough as a coach educator to allow it to run a little bit, like, if as long as it stays within the grounds of your general respect, but allow it to run a little bit, because that could be really meaningful conversation there. I think this idea of the psychological safety, as you say, a lot of that stuff. Well, we want to show it in our actions, but we have to be mindful of not being so caught up by it that we don't actually make way for a really interesting debate, you know, that has energy behind it and all those things. It's attention, isn't it?
So there's loads of stuff here that, again, is really cool to play with. So first, when you said critical discourse, great phrase, it made me think of radical candor. So when time is of the essence and we want to deal with things quite quickly, give feedback quickly, reflect on things relatively quickly, we don't always have the time to create a setup, which is, thank you for this. This was quite cool. We'd like to explore some of the things that you did really well. Now we're going to look at some of the things you want to work upon and that sort of thing. That space time isn't always available to us. So contracting that we're going to use more of a critical kind of conversation, a critical discourse, and contracting using what others have termed as radical candor. If we create the right environment, what we're trying to get to when we're talking about radical candor is, I'm telling you this because I care and I believe it's going to help you. So we can get to the point of saying, look, I'm not telling you this to be a dick. I'm not telling you this because I'm trying to make life difficult for you. By hearing this now, you can act upon it and do something with it. But even that debate. So you imagine your coach education course, whether it's if it's, let's say it's face to face, and you often have some sort of classroom environment. You've got 4 or 5 people sitting at tables and they're debating a point. Now, if they're around a round table and they're debating a point as a collective of 5 or 6 people, that's a very different atmosphere and set of challenges to if we had 6 people in a row of chairs sitting in front of 6 people in a row of chairs about half a meter from each other. So they're physically close to each other and they've given opposing views to debate. Now they have to talk to the people in front of them, make eye contact, and strongly justify their position. Suddenly, there's a feeling associated with that that's different, and people respond to it differently. And you can talk then about not just the context and the content, but also what was that like for you sitting across from each other? You know, when did it get your kind of heart rate racing? You know, did your palms start sweating? So there's a whole experience of emotion that can go with some of these things that you can use as part of a learning tool as well.
Yeah, I know, 100%. And I suppose it's for the coach educator, then it's to see their environment online, or I suppose the example you gave face to face, is the environment's a living thing. It has an influence on people. It's so, you know, how you even set up that room is actually really important. And maybe it can change depending on how the session's moving as well. You can move things, it just depends. But I think that's absolutely correct. I think there's so much within that that's interesting. I always wonder as well, because I know that obviously the next stage is talking about how we then we'll build a space that's psychologically safe out saying that, and a space that there's debate, there's provocation, there's a space where there's opportunity for sense making. About aspect of this, and I suppose coming back to what you said at the very start, where you mentioned about what's relevant to the learner and what does the learner want. See, because I'm quite intrigued to know what your view is in terms of the motivational aspect of this, because we're again, if we're associating sort of like the buzzwords within coach education, there's psychological safety, there's contracting, there's learner-centered learning. What's your view on, not every learner that comes to coach education wants to be collaborative. Not every learner wants to be talking to people the whole time. Some learners want to listen, and they do want quite a transactional relationship. Now, I know that from and this, I'm just intrigued to see your perspective in terms of your understanding of the learning science and your professional knowledge of this. I know that it still is often more helpful for people if they are integrating with other people and they're talking and this and that. And sometimes it's what the learner wants versus what the learner needs. But how again how do you get that balance correct at times? If it's not in the planning of courses, then it's often in delivery of it to catch different preferences at different times. So when we want to just have a transactional relationship to them, we want to chat and mingle. That I think that's a hard thing, because we're told all the time it has to be very collaborative.
But this is where I like the phrase, all learning experiences are flawed. With the best of our intentions, we will never create the best experience for all learners. And we have to accept that. So we can be our best, and that's our job, is to be our best. And we can try and help them be their best. And we'll often meet somewhere in the middle. There are some things we can do to enhance that experience, but what we can't do is take responsibility for the learner. We can take responsibility for the learning and the experience that we're trying to create, but we have to ensure the learner realizes it's their role is this. And yes, there is that tension between, we believe social learning, collaboration is more helpful when it comes to sense making and retention, particularly that conversation with others, that ability to play things out and understand whether they would or wouldn't work. That's so helpful. However, there are some people that really just don't want to talk, whether they're introverts. There are some people that get high anxiety from interacting with strangers, those who are neurodivergent, ADHD, autism, that sort of thing. And there are some people who may just be choosing to be distant. Again, I can't cater for all of those people to all of the extent, but what I can do, and which is what I do for most of my courses, I ask one question to everybody before they attend. And the question goes along the lines of, what is it that I can do to help you make the most of this experience? And with that, what is it that you need to tell me so that can happen? Now, that can be anything from, I need to sit in the corner near the toilet, near the exit, so I can go to the toilet because I have a weak bladder. Or that can be, actually, I really struggle with social interaction, so please don't get me to stand up in front of people and start telling people my life story. Or it could be, I have dietary needs, whatever it is. It caters for all of those. Now, 9 times out of 10, people don't respond. And if they don't respond to that question, which I ask in advance, then I have to forgive myself a bit more then for not maybe meeting their needs, because they didn't come towards me with valuable information that would have helped the design and delivery. I have to then crack on with doing my best with what I can see in front of me and how I can interact with people. If I take too much responsibility for being everything they need, I'll probably start to lose confidence, and I'll probably start to become a lesser version of myself and start questioning everything I'm doing. And that then is a disservice to everybody else. So we have to ensure that, we've made space for people to tell us what they need from the experience in advance so we can prep and plan for it. Let's be honest about what we can do for most and for all and what we can't do for some, and then when we build the experience, let's be attentive to that. My partner, she would hate some of the sessions that I would run because of a neurological kind of predisposition, let's say, because it means there's interaction. But I would say, but you haven't been to one of my sessions yet, so you haven't seen how I create an experience that allows you to talk to strangers when you might not want to. So it's about really just working with the room alongside the things I've just sort of shared.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think good on you insofar as, like, because more often than not, I think we're told that we have to put this image up that we are so entirely inclusive of everything at all times, and it's like we're still human, like this, and we have limited capacity to, like you say, be all those things to everyone at all times, and you're still also trying to do the job of, without it sounding like the connotations are attached to when I say transmit the learning, you're still doing the job of delivering the learning, and that in itself, in order to do that and be high quality, you still have, that has to still be at the forefront of your mind, and you can so easily, and we're trying to cater to all these different things, so it's the importance, therefore, it sounds like it's about providing opportunity, and then if it's taken, then great. If it isn't, then that has to be an appreciation that you are in your own space, working within constraints. That sometimes I feel torn. There's always that idea of there's no such thing as a bad student, only bad teachers. And I don't agree with that. and I think that's okay to say, because there are people who do really good work. They plan sessions, coach education sessions, and you can lead a horse to water, but there is sometimes people have got their own things going on, and that's okay. It can't always be the coach educator's responsibility to develop people's character. And people, particularly in adult education, they are coming there with the assumption that they don't need to be there. They are there to learn. You can help them within that space, but there has to be and you have to be comfortable as a coach educator to say you've done enough, and that it's down to the learner to meet you at the other end of that journey. I think that is really important, because you get really down on yourself otherwise.
Yeah. You use two words, opportunity and meet you there. And that's it. Like, you're trying to create the opportunity for them to meet you there, and their job is to come towards you. And look, I've only had it on a few occasions. I've had one occasion where I've actually had to find the courage to actually ask, well, the phrasing, I think, went something along the lines of, I'm not sure if this is the right place for you. Maybe you'd like to spend the rest of the day elsewhere. And because a particular learner was being excessively disruptive by always being the first to answer, always being the loudest with the answer, and happy to strongly disagree with us consistently in front of the audience. So one person was having a negative impact on 24 others. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't have done or said what they said, but how and when could have been better placed, just in terms of being a better citizen, being a better human. That's not about being a good learner or a bad educator. There's a way that we can interact with each of those human beings, which is, you talk about character. And there are other occasions where I've had quiet conversations with learners to say, like, to get the most out of this might help if you did this, or if help. I suppose that's why I work a lot more in adult education, because you see it less often, and then when you do see it and you call it, it actually does generally change. Whereas working with 16 and below, that's a very tricky place to be when you're trying to keep kids motivated and you're trying to keep them on board, but still hold some level of respect and responsibility for that. And I find that personally quite a lot more challenging. And I go and watch educators do amazing jobs with young people and sit there going, that's why I was only a lecturer in further education for 2 or 3 years. That's a different skill set.
Yeah. And I think, I suppose still brought in the conversation about adult education, I think there's, with the coach educator as well, there's got to be a comfortability with the fact that the impact you have on the candidates in your course you might never see. So it's sort of like, I think there was I forget the man's name as well. We were fortunate enough for the Scottish FA to have someone come in and who spoke to this, but it was more of kids in mind. But some of the most meaningful experiences aren't always the ones that we enjoy the most. So like, I've been on courses where I've been called out for something in my session, and at the time there's an emotional reaction, but 6 months later, man, that has made me a better coach, because that coach educator never got to see my gratitude for that at the time. And I think I think that's really important for the coach educator to be okay with, and understanding you are doing your job correctly if you upset people to some degree, because you have to push people a little bit within the realms of, obviously, again, respect and name and all these other things, but you need to be that spanner on the works, don't you, to some degree?
So the way we see this is learning is effortful. So I can create a learning experience that people walk away from, like, and if they were to tick a feedback happy sheet, there'd be lots of big smiles on it saying that was a great day, I really enjoyed this activity, this and the other. But if you ask them 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later, what did they remember? And they only remember the sandwiches or the air conditioning or where they sat or a funny joke you told, then you've not done your job as an educator. I'm more inclined to create more effortful experiences where the feedback is probably going to be less positive, but more connected to the experience. So that 3, 4, 5 weeks later, when people say, what do you remember about it? They actually can draw upon a memory in a stronger fashion because we followed due process. We've made them think about it. And when it comes to the third part of our model, which is about retention, we've helped them organize their thoughts in a way that they can recall it. We've helped them make a plan for interacting with this in the future. We've got them to commit to some things that will get them replaying this information in multiple ways. We've got that, but all of those things mean I'm no longer passive as a learner, receiving information and just simply talking about it. I'm now active in reconstructing what you said in a way that works for me, in displaying it in a way that I can recall. I mean, I know this is an audio, but everything I do is littered with highlighter and scribbles and stuff like that, because I'm going, you've asked this question. What do I mean? What does the question mean to me? How would I respond to it? And what other things play from it? So I've organized my thoughts so it's easier to recall them later. That's effortful. And that's where we kind of need to be. When you say push learners, we want to push them to do something with the learning.
And adults, and actually the person who I was trying to recall, Peter Sturgis, who does some work at the
Good
FA,
man.
Brilliant, really good. That was the person. I just wanted to give that shout out to that really, really interesting coach educator. But yeah, so that point as well. So see around, and I've found this, that sometimes adult learners, particularly if it's like in a coach education, a governing body, vocational training award course, they haven't been in a learning setting in a long time. Sometimes for some of them, they really haven't. And some people, I think, shy away from reminding people of really fundamental, helpful ways of either retaining information. And it sounds condescending to say, but like the obvious one of remember to take notes and remember to write things down. I always think for an adult, you might be worried about saying that as if like you're acting patronising, but it's actually really important. Or even, I don't know, maybe to allow them to recall their own learning methods, maybe from when they were younger. You're trying to do those things while you as a coach educator yourself are also conscious and taking down notes and being in a position to help you, build on and probe and prompt them further, isn't it? So I wonder, has there been any examples in the past of, outside of note taking, is there any strategies that would assist, if not the coach educator in remembering what people are saying, but also the people who are in front of them? Have you done anything in that space to help with retention?
Yeah. So again, I didn't realize these were things. It's amazing. One of the reasons I work across industries, education, sport, and business, is because there's so much that we're all doing in the space of learning, but in a different way. And one of those examples I've already mentioned, 1, 2, 4 all, and think, pair, share. Those come from teacher education. I don't see them in coach education, and I don't see them in corporate learning, but they're powerful tools for building relationships and for that kind of like attention and sense-making piece. In terms of retention, another one that comes from the teaching and learning industry, from education, is knowledge organizers. It sounds like a cool phrase, knowledge organizer, but basically, how are you taking an A4 piece of paper and constructing arrows and boxes on that to help people record their own interpretation of what you're saying for a particular topic? So it might be that in the middle of an A4 paper, you simply have a ring and it says key theme, and then 4 boxes on the outside, which might say, key principles in practice, scenario example, and other notes. And people then record their thoughts onto that page. So you've given them a structure, a scaffold, a framework to help them record and make their things memorable, rather than just a blank piece of A4. So if we can create knowledge organizers for particular units of learning that are easy for people to work with and access, then that's really helpful, because if they've not been in education for a long time, or when they were in, these weren't utilized, this is a really kind of like cool, helpful tip. Someone like me, I'm a mind mapper. So everything that you say, whether I'm on a phone call with a client, whether I'm in a session, I will draw some sort of mind map. In the center will be the person or the theme, and we just keep going out and out and out and out, writing relevant notes or highlighting, and sometimes even drawing pictures. Some people, create, I think it's called sketch note. So they create a story through sketches. but encouraging people to do this. I think that's the hardest thing, is where people haven't taken notes before. There's some sort of like, is this childlike taking notes, or is this boring, or this new way of doing it? So it's getting people over that embarrassment maybe, or the hurdle of what will people say if they see I've drawn a picture to represent,
Yeah.
the sort of like model of play.
Yeah.
Or
But
something like that.
is there two things to that then? Because you're actually now making me rethink actually even my initial thought of like, make sure you take notes. But there is actually something maybe counterproductive to the idea of a single sheet of paper, as you say, and writing, certainly when it's got a page and it's just the lines, and writing in that sort of linear curve. Because if we're talking about coaching, for example, there's so many aspects of coaching where there's tension and where there's interrelationships between things. And if we want to help people form notes that they actually will use to recall in a way that is appreciative of the different interrelationships between things, it's very difficult as a sort of artifact that they can take away with them for them to translate that by following a standardized sort of sheet of paper and the lines. Whereas the mind mapping allows an opportunity to both recall, but as you are writing down the notes, you're actually doing the work as well, because the whole point of a mind map, isn't it, is that the learner has to connect the dots themselves. They have to draw the lines between things. And I suppose one part of learning science, and I suppose I've always appreciated, is we need to use information in order for it to be encoded into longer term memory. So while we might not see, sometimes certainly in sports, and everything seems like it has to be practical in the actual physical activity of thing, for a coach, the practical activity is using the information they've been given. So mind mapping is both a way of retaining information but building it simultaneously. So that seems really powerful as a different way of constructing the learning space for retention. And then also, I suppose, how it links back into then helping them further speak up and further construct arguments. I just see a lot of utility in that, Kurt.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was what was his name, Brian Buchanan, something like that. But he was like the godfather of mind mapping, and I think Open University in the olden days used to use a lot of his work. And I remember coming across a book, and it was about like I Use Your Head, I think it was called, and it was all about understanding how the brain works, even to the point of how we read. You think you read in a linear way across a line, actually your eyes are bouncing backwards and forwards looking at things. And it brought me to mind mapping. And I think once you understand the science and the psychology behind mind mapping, it becomes even more valuable because you understand how it can really help you. Now, you can take that 2 or 3 steps further as well. You can go, right, well, I've got a mind map. How do I downsize this to something that's even, you talked about utility. It becomes like a flashcard I have in my pocket. Okay, so that's distilling the information further. Or how do I teach what I have on this page to someone else? So if I was to pass it to them and say to them, make sense of this, and they couldn't, they would ask me some questions and I could explain it to them. So now we have a peer-to-peer kind of conversation going on where I'm teaching somebody something that I've learned and my understanding of it. Whilst doing that, I'm deeper, it's becoming more embedded within me because I am revisiting it and I'm helping another explore their learning as well. So this, back to this kind of piece around retention in our model, we're trying to deal with the idea of encoding. How do we get that information in? And how do we stem forgetting? Because forgetting is a natural thing of the human brain. It's the default mechanism. So if it's not useful, we forget. So what we're doing is trying to make it seem more useful by revisiting it, turn it into some sort of mind map or some sort of recorded organizer that we can then actually talk about and share with others. That all increases the likelihood of retention occurring.
Because you need to forget to remember as well. That is part of memory consolidation, isn't it? So having spaces where you're moving between things and going back to it. Does that also probably help, I suppose, overcome the challenge of some of the most meaningful coaching lessons that you can learn can feel initially quite abstract, particularly if it gets to the point where we're introducing them to theoretical models, because we're decoupling actually at least at the initial point, we're decoupling the theory from the context, because it's certainly when it's positioned towards a whole room of different people at different times, you can't contextualize that to everyone at one time. So you have to transmit that in a way that is quite abstract and separated. But then that idea of peer teaching is going to, again, we want them to use the information, but it's part of helping them learn it better for themselves by teaching someone else. They're having to make it practical. So they're challenging them then to make what was abstract practical, intelligible, and those sorts of things. And at the very least, it will prime them to then ask more questions for elaboration in a way that's meaningful to the learner. Because I always think, sometimes as a coach educator, we can give our own probes, but the probes themselves might not be exactly positioned in the way that's most meaningful to the learner. We want to instead probably create an environment where the learners are probing us, because then they're giving us it in a way that matters more to them at the point where it matters more, and the point where it's building on what they are understanding already. And that's higher quality learning, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot that could be helped through that.
Yeah. Again, I'll use a word that you brought up, elaboration. You know, that whole, we call it elaborative rehearsal. We're going through the information, we're rehearsing it to ourselves, we rehearse it with others, but it's elaboration. It's making more of it, doing something with it. And I think all of that feeds into, does this really make sense to me? Can I trust it? Can I use it? How will I use it? Can I express it to somebody else for them to use it? If I can't, have I understood it properly? How do I need to change my language? What new vocabulary do I need to find? Because I am not quite articulating myself in the way I expect. All of that stuff really helps. I mean, it has to be still attached to the motivation, like to do it. So it is of value to me. It will help me. It's easier to talk about it in the business sense, which is like people often will learn these things if it's going to save them time and money. So if we can communicate that to coaches, doing this is going to save you time or thinking effort. Like if you can get this nailed now, it'll be so much easier for you in the future to think about the things that you need and think about them quicker. So you'll get some time back and you'll process stuff and decision make better as a consequence of this. And that's what you want. You want to make your life easier. Can you make my life easier? Can you save me money? Can you make me time? And those things will hopefully continue to motivate people to keep going with the experience.
So then that brings us, and I don't know if we've actually already moved on to this point already, because I know that, and it might be interesting to know, do you see these steps we're going to now speak about internalization, or maybe further speak about it? We've probably already been flowing into it, but apart, maybe a sub point of this before I ask you to delve into that particular strand more. Is this seen as, is it formulaic, this sort of framework, and that you move from A, B, C, or is it quite iterative? Are you moving back and forward between these things? It's a dynamic process, isn't it? So I just wonder, how often does the retention process actually reinform the attention process, and all these things are, it's live, isn't it? So I just wonder if you could speak to that a little bit before then helping us understand the final other aspect of it with internalization.
It'd be lovely if it was simple and just linear. You went, it's just attention, then sense making, then retention, then internalization. The reality is it's backwards and forwards. It's across each other at times, because you might find that people lack motivation partway through the session. So you have to bring that A back in and go, okay, how do I spark people? So just the other day I was working with the Youth Sport Trust. We were delivering a workshop, and after lunch you could see people were dying. The motivation to continue to attend was low because they were tired. They'd driven 3 hours to get there. They'd already had 3 hours of input and work. They'd gone for lunch. Melatonin's kicking in. Right, I have to think, not sense making. I have to think attention, which is how do we get them to attend? What's their baseline motivation? What's going to keep them interested at this point in time? Right, let's get that going. And it helped to kickstart the afternoon by revisiting the things that are going to motivate them, but also that attention piece is cognitive load. In the afternoon now, they've had 3 hours drive, 3 hours of input. How do I manage the cognitive load? Is this afternoon more engaging and more practical than more cerebral? So it's just important to keep looking at the model in relation to your audience, not seeing it as a linear thing, but what does my audience need from me right now? And if the lesson plan says do X, but they need Y, you're better off going with the Y, because that's going to help you keep them for the rest of the session. Whereas if you start losing them at 2:00 and you've got them until 5:30, you know that you'll be struggling in terms of yourself, because you'll be watching their soul come out of them as you carry on going, we just need to get through this, which is not learning anymore. It's some sort of engineering, sort of a manufacturing process.
Yeah, and I probably find myself guilty at times, and I think that's partly as much for the re-stimulating the educator as it is for the learner. I find myself at times, right guys, just a wee bit longer to go, and you say the words, and that's not really great. So you kind of want to, that's to help you as well, I can imagine. So it's that sort of learning fatigue. It's really relevant, that I think, because most coach education courses are ran sometimes a full day, just for resource reasons. It's just logistically, it's better sense for the people that are putting them on that they run them across a full day. And that's not always, it's both good in some sense, as it really allows the learner to embed themselves in a topic across time. But it then takes the skill for the educator, doesn't it, to then ensure that you keep them motivated. So what is internalisation then? So for this next part for it, or the next strand of this?
I'll come to that in a minute, but I want to come back to your thing about the coach
quite
education in a day, because this
What's
again
your thought?
is we have to make this business appropriate, because let's say learning model would say that we should deliver this for 3 hours once a week over 6 weeks, because it allows people to learn, play, test, embed, and come back and reflect. But actually, we can't afford the room. They can't afford the time. They can't afford the travel. So we do it in a day. Okay, so we do it in a day. There's a yin and a yang in terms of benefits and drawbacks from that. So they're going to be cognitively challenged if it's all in a day, but at least we know we've got them. So it's about saying, making the most of what we have rather than complaining about what we don't have. Like, you've got a day. Like, right, what's the best we can do with this? Because what we can do is, leading into the internalization piece, is create such a springboard in this one day that they will continue to learn when they leave. And part of that is with each other. So if you create the right relationship, they will have naturally swapped phone numbers. They will have naturally connected in a way that they want to speak to each other afterwards. And they will have a compulsion to do more if you've created that day in the right day. If you've just done that day, I need to get through this content, they're going to just want to go home and rest. So I absolutely understand the tension that is in coach education and a number of other education situations where we only have a certain amount of time and we have huge amounts of content. What's the best way to do it? Well, it's about motivating people to do more when they've left, rather than trying to get as much in while they're there.
So I suppose that the response you get to that then is, and I'm doing argue for and against this here, because a lot of times people will say, well, that everyday coach, that parent that's volunteering and maybe again they're coming to lunch as they need to, or they do want to learn, but outside of that 3 hours that they've already managed to corner off for this course, they just don't have the time perhaps to consult materials. By shoehorning everything into the one space, you can't necessarily predict that they're going to be any more engaged at that time either. So it might be that, if we're looking across the who's there, and if we're kind of seeing the coach as someone who's like not offering an end point but a start point for curiosity, maybe it's a disservice to not encourage and not offer a bit of an opportunity for ownership, because someone has to lead their own development anyway, doesn't it? It's a bit of a reality there of like, it can't be totally, if you're here, we'll cover this, and it's then to the detriment of all these other aspects that we now know is really important to learning. Adult education, they don't need to be there. Again, maybe we need to raise their bar and not necessarily lower our bar. I think maybe we're guilty of that a little bit too much.
Yeah, and this is definitely where internalization comes in, because what we're trying to do here is, when we were looking at where learning failed, I suppose, or where there was the most attrition or whatever, it was people just didn't recall, or people didn't retain, and a lot of that was down to not putting it into practice. So then we have to ask, why is it not being put into practice? And we fell upon two kind of areas. I'm going to do this in reverse. One was deliberate practice. They didn't have a place to practice. If you've delivered if it's a coaching course, right, you've been through a coaching course, but you don't have a club to go and work with, like, you're going to forget that learning. So it's simple. How do we create the opportunity for them to go and experiment and play with this learning in a way that's deliberate? It has a defined goal. It has a set of performance criteria. It has an opportunity for feedback. It has all of these things that relate to deliberate practice. Then we're going to increase the likelihood of learning occurring. So that's something that needs to be kind of like thought about whenever you're creating something where there's a skill development or knowledge development, and there's a need for kind of practicing, whether it's customer service skills, and I've got nowhere to practice my customer service skills, it will be something that it will decay over time, that learning, and be forgotten. But now we have to get them there. This is the piece that was our most recent discovery, let's say. our own most recent Eureka moment, which was the idea of the self-directed learner. And how do we create that? And what we realized that sat even behind that was this idea of learner agency. Learners having perception that they are capable to be in control of their own development. Do they feel confident enough? Have they the skills to do this? Have they the opportunity to do this? If you haven't, again, allowed them to build enough confidence to go and practice, if you haven't delivered the training in a way that they feel now that they have the skills and they have a self-belief in themselves, if they don't have those things, they won't go and do that deliberate practice. Even though it's not content necessarily that you're delivering in your session, when you're designing and delivering your session, you always have to be thinking about the end, which is these people need to feel confident when they leave. They need to feel that I need to have taught them the skills, and they need to have the opportunity and self-belief to go and do something. And they need the physical place. Like we need to say, that's the club you're going to practice, or that's the working environment that you're going to practice. And some of that comes down as well with setting meaningful goals. Sometimes assessment tasks don't feel meaningful. I've got to do this assessment task because it will help me pass the course, but it doesn't feel meaningful. So we have to craft challenging goals that are not challenging or it's hard to do, challenging goals that are like, oh, I wonder how I'm going to do this, or I really want to give this a go. And that hopefully will then lead to the increased, and we keep talking, the increased likelihood of learning occurring, the increased likelihood of internalization, because we're not in control of that now. They've left us. They've left our course. They're off somewhere else. It's the area that we have least direct impact upon, but it's one of the ones we have to think about most as a consequence as we're building our experience.
So what's your views then, Kurt, on the ratio, I suppose, of formative to summative assessment within sort of coach education? Because every course does work towards an assessment, but then if we're really, what do we actually proclaim that we want to cultivate in coaches? It's curiosity, it's continual learning. So while there's, and I'm going to jump between arguments for and against this, well, a summative assessment is used as a performance benchmark tool, and I suppose it's always, again, how the learner interprets the summative assessment. It doesn't need to be seen as a global assessment of them as a coach, but it could be more compartmentalised to where they're currently at and a test of their current progress throughout the course and in a certain space, and then they get a bit of feedback and then they can build on it afterwards, while also allowing the, let's be honest, the governing body to standardise things enough that they can fairly assess and have criteria, all those sorts of things. It's a lot more challenging if a course ends on a formative feedback while still protecting the integrity of the badge or whatever then that they move away with. But I always wonder, what do we do in these spaces? Because some things, everything, I think we over-assess people all the time, and I can see real detriment potentially to both the confidence and again, I always say this, that coaches are performer and we want to make people feel confident in their performance, but also their curiosity, because there are connotations attached to when you pass something summatively that it's an endpoint. And then again, what are we actually meant to be? What is actually our role as a coach educator? Are we not meant to, are we gatekeepers are we the experts, or are we trying to build experts and encourage and inspire experts? And I just wonder about all these things. I'm just curious to know your thoughts on that.
So having designed terrible learning experiences in the past, and with that, learning tasks and assessment tasks, and then watched learners kind of like navigate them, I have a number of reflections. One is, if I'm time starved, I'm not going to do anything that's formative if it doesn't directly contribute to me passing the test. So I'm probably just going to read the questions and skip them, because you're not marking me on them. And if I don't do them, it doesn't matter. The same with the kids in the house when it comes to homework tasks. Is this contributing to the end outcome? If not, I'm not motivated to do it. If it is, then I'll do it. And then the assessment tasks are like a point in time. I am able to do this at this point in time. I'll do it, but I'll do it because I need to cross this boundary of not passed to passed or unqualified to qualified. And I think that still exists a lot across, most qualifications, regardless of industry. Haven't yet found a sport or an entity that is willing to take on this as an option for learners. But I've always wondered about having a spectrum of status So, and then the community, I'm talking about the community for that particular industry, to judge or justify what's the right level. So level 1 could be, I simply attend the course. So I have a certificate of attendance, and that's celebrated in some way to say, well done for attending. It's not saying I'm good or bad, it's saying I've attended. The community, and if it's, let's take football, for example, the community of coaches acknowledge that you've attended something. The parents bringing children to you acknowledge that you have only attended it. So they know themselves that there is no quality assurance measure, just that you've attended learning. So they can make judgments based on that. The next level is, I have undertaken some learning tasks that my peers might have reviewed. So it's not a formal assessment in any way. And there's some sort of badge associated with that. So some narrative comes back to give some sense of quality, but it's from a peer review rather than a formal assessment. The next layer might then be more formal assessment, where I go through a process. So I get a completion certificate with a judgment mark next to it. The next tier could be, well, actually, I publish my results. So if it's, I had to coach a session, it was filmed, I published the film of that onto YouTube for others to watch and learn from. So I become a valuable asset within my community. So we go from being the mass market, attended only, gradually shrinking down to, actually I've become like as you say, like maybe an expert in my field, in my area of coaching. And watch whether people then choose to go along that path themselves based on where they want to stop, based on what they want to do. So to do the job that they want to do, if attendance only is all they need, they stop. If actually peer review is all they need, then they stop. But if they're personally motivated to become like an expert within their community, they might go through to assessment and publish results. Now, I've got it written down somewhere, like in a bit more eloquent way, but it's always been an idea of mine to say, if we just let learners choose how far they want to go based on the external value of that, how far would they go?
Yeah, because I mean, the content. Oh no, sorry, Kurt. Yeah.
It was just like, so if parents went, well, you've only attended, so I'm actually going to go to the guy over there who's publishing his data, he's publishing his stories, because we know that he's up to the standard. So that club loses players because they're going somewhere else, right? Well, I'm motivated now to move myself along the path of assessment to whatever, because I want people to come to me. Because some people might come on a coaching, not many, but some people might come on a coaching course just because they want to learn about coaching. They don't actually want to coach. They just want to learn about coaching. So they don't need to do the assessment. They just need to go through the experience.
Yeah, and I wonder, so, I mean, you're making me categorise it a little bit, and I just completely agree with that. And I suppose what you try to do, you're wanting to create and further motivate conscientious coaches to go down a development path. And I suppose the way I've always sort of split it is you get completion of attendance versus completion of assessment versus completion of engagement. And I think where perhaps we miss out on is that we can still have assessment, but we don't need to. We can still have activities where feedback can be given. Do we need to actually? Does the grading, and we can still grade, but does the grading need to count towards whether or not they complete the course? Because coaches naturally are going to be judged on their engagement towards CPD. And we could have courses that are absolutely challenging coaches. There's tasks that they should complete. But completion and engagement is different from tasks that they have to complete to a certain standard. And I suppose what it would require, and the hazy aspect is, it requires then the governing body to be open with the fact that their engagement varies, quality of output varies, even where there is full, consistent engagement. But if coaches are getting judged outside of the course, they're still going to be judged across how many different courses they engage in, other aspects of what they've cultivated. And I suppose, are we putting courses on to make money, or are we putting courses on to fuel motivation to continue to learn? And that's where I suppose that's where we need to be careful with. I think the completion through assessment is that it leads to endpoints. And I think that's just counterproductive, I suppose, sometimes, to what we actually want to instill in the coaching workforce, which is a desire to learn and not a requirement to learn. Because most people that start courses that are coached to the assessment they enjoy the most when the course ends, which isn't great. That's not great, isn't it? It's just interesting to back that about with you sometimes, just as we do need to think about the different ways that we actually put together coach education and what are we trying to actually get out of it.
I think this is where there is that challenge between the doing the right thing versus actually what human behavior is. So we had multiple, when I used to work at Sports Coach UK, Boys UK Coaching, we had something like 33 workshops that were all valuable. Content was amazing and all could advance a coach's kind of skills and expertise and confidence. But if you looked at the uptake of those, I think there was only 10 that was financially viable because of the throughput, and only 3 that actually really made money. And those 3 were the compliance ones. It was things like disability, child protection, and might have been some sort of fundamental sort of activity. But they were ones that were equality, something like that. They were the ones that were mandated by governing bodies for people to do. The next 7, you just saw a drop off based on how popular they were in relation to that point in time. And when we dug away at it, we found whilst people enjoyed the CPD and really, really wanted it and gained value from it, if it didn't give them a badge of credibility that was recognized by other people, or if it didn't allow them to do more in terms of jurisdiction of role, so I can coach in more places or with more people, or it allowed them to get greater income, the likelihood of them going on that workshop diminished because there was an end goal for them, which was, can I do more? Can I work with more people? Can I earn more money? Do I have a greater status? So we have to recognize, whilst we'd love to create these amazing experiences, people just choose, if it doesn't hit home with some of those motivators, they're just great, like books in a library that never get read. They're great books. They just don't get read because it's not going to do anything directly for me right now.
So it would almost require, I think, a wider cultural buy-in to that is the way in which coaches are. Because then we would need to, coaches would only take further part in CPD, where, as I say, it's more completion through engagement. If they were able to trust that the employer out there is also going to look at that in a way that's favourable as well. So, and these are all competing agendas. I suppose that if it's not about, we need to change it so it's only one way, I suppose it's just starting to recognise where each of those different learning agendas can still borrow from other methods and ways of doing it. So, attendance to completion can lend itself to some aspects about attendance to engagement. It can lead through that, vice versa, as can attendance. And I suppose it's about meeting the learner where they're at as well. So I think that's partly why you see the trend where the initial courses are just about attendance and engagement. The next ones start to challenge people. And there's a lot of real reason to that. But I suppose the thing I always would say is the level 3 courses should still care about engagement, and it shouldn't still, even as the reward and the impulse to standardise further and further increases in order to legitimise the course, we can't forget the importance of creating a space where engagement is rewarded and valued still, and not seen as an endpoint. I suppose that's maybe where we could meet in the middle.
I definitely think that has to be a thing. I'm just acknowledging that when you build more stuff, you have to acknowledge people's why will or won't they go. But one of the biggest things, you say, create experiences that are engaging. I think the key thing is don't turn people off learning. Number of people that have gone on workshops who come away going, that was a poor experience, and it's down to sometimes the lack of skill maybe of the educator, or the need for the educator to press on and get a lot of content across. And I think if sports were going to invest money in any one particular place, it would be more and more investment in their delivery workforce, because a really skilled practitioner can make poor content accessible, can make poor content have the right melody for that group that they're working with. So, give them, if you're going to spend less money somewhere, it might be in the products and the assets, more money in the people who work with those products and assets, because that's where the relationship is.
And they're the people that are going to actually bring that material to life and contextualise it, isn't it? It's so true. No, it isn't. Kurt, no, thanks so much. It's so interesting just to get your perspective on those things. Have we missed anything? So I just want to give you this opportunity, I suppose, in case there's anything in this sort of space. And then we could talk all day, I think, about different strands of this. We've kind of moved between online and face-to-face. But yeah, I just want to check in on that. Do you feel quite content?
I've really enjoyed it, mate. To be fair, I'm
Yeah,
sitting here
it's just,
thinking this is again. I have to tell people that this is what I do for a job, and it's it's quite a cool thing. So no,
oh,
thank you
it's
for the
massive.
time.
Like, how could people follow up then? Because you obviously you offer mentorship, coaching, CPD. Where could people find you? Social media, website? Maybe if you can plug that in, I think that a lot of people would be really interested in that.
Yeah. So I am still there and thereabouts on X, which was Twitter. So at Coach Developer, and you can find me there, or just find me on LinkedIn, Kurt Ewald Lindley, EWALD, or Google Be More Learning and Development. You'll probably find my website and hopefully my smiling face. But yeah, just don't be afraid to get in touch and have a conversation.
Yeah, and if I could probably speak for some of the stuff that I see Kurt put out for those that are listening, it is so accessible, and I think really importantly, I think what is a real testament to yourself, Kurt, is so down to earth and in terms of how you communicate this stuff, and it's really accessible. It's helped me learn more, even where, but at the same time challenging. So even if you do already know a little bit about it, I think what you offer is the detail, and it's the when to put things into place. That's the difference. That's the professional knowledge of how to work with models and how to create learning out of ideas. There's a separation often between the idea and the outcome. And I think what your work's doing is helping us really bridge that gap sometimes and ensure that we get the outcomes that we want for our learners through the way that we construct and deliver learning. So yeah, Kurtner, thanks so much again just for coming on. Yeah, so for those that are listening, I hope you found this conversation with Kurt as useful as I certainly have, and I will see you next time.